Welcome to Insight, a series exploring the deeper philosophies of renowned traditional martial artists, hosted by Ray Hughes, a martial artist with 50 years of experience.
Hey, welcome to today's show. Today is part two of a two-part conversation with Sensei Rick Hobusch. First part, he discussed the early years and his philosophies and the training issues, dark characters, and he will now continue those conversations into this part. You know, I wrote some articles back 30 years ago. Eventually going to come out in my book. And one of the articles I wrote was their arrogance, I felt we contributed to. By bowing down, and we put these guys on such pedestals that even like today's rock stars or even like today's professional athletes, they're young men and everybody idolizes us and their egos get out of control. Do you think we contributed to a little bit of that?
Oh, there's no doubt that because we had kind of bought into the mysticism of the East as far
Yes.
as what we thought that they were almost superhuman and so forth. And I want to tell you, there were some incredible athletes that came over. Sensei
Right.
Osaka and Sensei Takahashi have some innate skills that are unbelievable. The thing about it is, from the athleticism and so forth, a lot of them were incredible. Like Sensei Osaka for sure was in the elite 200 within Japan back there among thousands of people.
Yeah.
And the training at University of Nichidai was definitely survival of the fittest at that particular time. So they had gained a reputation and a feeling that they were in a high position at that time.
Yeah. It's very interesting. From my perspective, because I'm 5 to 10 years behind you in this growth, it seemed like the second generation American instructors seemed the ego started to tone down a little bit. I don't know if you saw that yourself. Maybe it was just in my own mind, but it just seemed to, it's not as bad today. Would you agree with that, with the ego
Oh,
thing?
I would definitely agree with that. The sad thing is there's not as many Japanese instructors coming over to share except for
Right.
during seminars. This was kind of the golden mountain back during the occupation in Japan, and there was some really need to come and find respect and so forth within the United States. So I think most of the Japanese instructors I know now that say are in their 30s or 40s are pretty mellow guys and
Uh,
pretty respectful of the different cultures.
it's funny. When I watched classes in those early days, like with Osaka Sensei, there was no philosophy taught. The only philosophy that I got that I was really loved is when we would go out together. And of course, being a low level person, I would be just sit there and listen to you guys talk over a glass of sake or something. And that's when some of the greatest philosophies that I heard that I actually started to apply. Is that the only time you got philosophy out of Osaka?
Uh, eh, yes, to a certain degree. They hated, to a certain degree, talking philosophy as we would understand it. They said,
Mhm.
no, the philosophy is in the doing. Philosophy is in the
Right.
sweat. And if you don't sweat, you can't have a philosophy about the martial arts. If you haven't been pressure tested, how do you know? And so they have a thing, as you know, called shingi tai. And they believe that that heart or spirit or that philosophy of the martial arts and deep understanding comes only by really pushing hard. And so that's the only way to learn the shin. Of course, then there's technique, and of course, then there's the brutal conditioning.
Right. Now, would you consider yourself a philosophical karate teacher when you were running your school? Or was it
Yes,
strictly kick and punch?
the thing about it is I, like you, really wanted to kind of get into the Japanese culture and understanding.
Right.
And I think this, I still, hmm, I had some mixed feelings because at first I was off track. I was thinking a great way was if I understood the philosophy, then I would be a better karate student. And to a certain
Right.
point, that is true. But it also takes you away from what you should be focusing on as far as the technique and the hard conditioning in order to build that understanding of the true heart to fight and so forth. But one of the things that's important was there was a problem with the Japanese instructors actually talking what is innate to them as far as understanding of certain
Mm,
concepts. And there's where all that reading and all that helped because, they talk about nagashi, inashi, all these
right.
terms within Wado. And when you say, well, could you explain them? They said, no, you understand them or you don't. And even some of the basic things like doing maigeri keage, they call it snap kick in English, but in truth, it means swing. So that whole
Mm.
translation and misdirection through using English sometimes became a problem.
You know,
So
it's
I
funny.
think philosophy helped.
the, and their English was so poor to start in with. Most
Yeah.
of these Japanese instructors, I didn't get the meaning when somebody would say you don't understand the culture unless you understand the language, and I never understood that until I started studying Japanese at ASU, and then I started to realize, oh, now I understand why they are having difficulty taking their understanding of a technique and putting it into the English. If you were American instructor, a student at that time, if you weren't reading and studying, I don't think you could get it just simply by going to class. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, class, especially in our dojo at Sugar House Dojo, it was mostly really focused on, I mentioned Shingi Tai, the Tai part,
Mm,
the conditioning. Oh my goodness. We really had
right,
some heavy, heavy workouts because the first step was being able to fight, was being in shape to be able to fight.
right,
And
right.
so that was a very big emphasis within the school. The aspect about technique was you watch and you steal it from me. You copy, but I'm not going to show you everything and I'm not going to show you often. So you better pay attention and you try to steal that technique from me. When someone asked Sensei Osaka about how much he must have taught me because I had a success in tournaments at the time, and he said, no, I didn't teach him anything. I didn't teach him any technique. And basically, what he did was I got to free spar him a few times. Very seldom he would demonstrate something, and if you were paying attention, you caught on. But it wasn't really high on the technical side, on the gi, the technique thing. That kind of changed when Sensei Takahashi came into the
Mm.
Sugar House Dojo in 1976, because we started working a lot more on specific technique and again, more emphasis on kata, kion kumite, and those type of things to where it became a little bit more rounded, but a real emphasis on making sure it was correct. Now, it became wonderful when Sensei Arakawa came in to Salt Lake to teach and a few things, as well as Sensei Suzuki and so forth, because
Mm.
they were, and the biomechanics that they had adapted and started teaching now through biomechanics instead of the way they had been trained before. That really started helping foreign students that were not in Japanese and in on the basic program at that time.
You know, and I think Americans, as a culture, want to ask questions about everything. I just know when Sensei Marlin came down and he opened the school, he was a fairly new black belt. And I can't even imagine one of my brand new black belts running a school. Yeah, he got my total respect. But I would be asking him questions all the time. So I could get away with that in reflecting back because being a Caucasian, I could do that with a Caucasian instructor. You probably couldn't do that with a Japanese instructor. Of course, I drove him crazy because I said, why are we doing this? Why is it this way? Why are we not doing it that way? And he would just wouldn't answer and then go and call you on the phone and find out how do you answer that stuff. Do you think that clash of cultures has got to have been crazy?
Well, you're quite right about that because during the class with the Japanese instructors, they did not let you stop class and ask questions. or
Right.
interrupt by asking a question. At the end, they would ask if there was any questions, but it was at the end of training. And
Mm.
it was never where you would speak out and ask a question during a class. If you did that, it was uh, there were a lot of punishment that came that way for speaking out, asking a question, because asking a question at the time looked like insubordination. It looked
Right.
like, yeah,
Right.
and it was heavily punished if you spoke out or asked questions other than when he asked you if you had a question.
Right. Because the Japanese, if I understood this right, a Japanese in a Japanese class, you wouldn't ask questions anyway. Either even after class, I don't think you would ask because it would be perceived as, like you're saying, questioning their technique or their skill.
Yes,
And yet
and
in
you
our culture, it's not that way.
oh, no, no, and, Marlin, to his great credit, really started to research and understand, and, of
Mhm.
course, he did an enormous amount of reading, and he got very much involved, and so he ended up being a very good instructor for Caucasians who had a little bit more difficulty with the Japanese instructors.
Well, when looking back, you're actually were blessed because you got put into that organization right away as a spokesman. Because I just remember when Osaka would teach a class, I'd be up there, he would do a technique and then look at you and then you would explain it to the class what he was talking about. That must have elevated you quickly with martial art understanding.
Uh, eh, yes, of course, then they would say, "Well, that's not right." That
Well,
happens often nowadays, actually.
one thing I learned really early on in my teaching career is never to say I know anything. I just say, I the way I understand it, it's this way. That way I never got caught because I remember Suzuki coming down and we went to Rick Savajan's dojo and Savajan was talking in front of the class with Suzuki standing there. And he said, this is the way it is. And Suzuki said, no, that's not right. You're completely wrong. He was so humiliated. And I just remembered never, ever say you know anything. Just say you understand it this way. That way you leave your way out. Did you feel that
Yes,
way up there?
that's an important thing is condition your phrase as not "No, but this is how I understand it may be." Yeah,
Exactly right.
and sometimes having a pretense of ignorance is a very good strategy.
Oh, very much so. How long did you run your school up there?
21 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my. So how did you get out of that? Did you just like retire one day or what happened?
What happened was within my profession, it became entry-level doctorate. At that time, I
Mm,
only had up to a master's degree in physical therapy. And so what happened was I told Sensei Osaka, because there was a couple others who wanted to take my place in the dojo to teach.
mm.
And so I told him that I was going over to doing a doctorate. So I ended up going back to school to do a clinical doctorate. And also, I talked to Sensei Takahashi because both of them were having me also guest lecture and teach at their different dojos at that time. And so it was a chance for me to break in order to get to my postgraduate clinical doctorate. Yeah. And
Now
so
you
that was,
competed. I remember you competed how long? How long, how late into your life did you compete? How old were you when you decided to quit
when I
compete, I should
competed.
say? Yeah.
Well, I fought on a multiple tournament basis until I was 34. However, I went back to Japan to get not only a Wado Kai JKF degree, but I also went back to Japan to get a JKF degree, which is it's all styles. So there was a
Right.
panel of multiple styles who tested my kihon, my kata, but also I did free sparring then. And I was 73 then. I'm now 70. So I was 73, and uh, they had to find two guys. One was 45 and one was 50, and that was the oldest people they could find for me to fight. And we had a great time fighting. Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed chasing them all around the ring. That
I
was,
tell you, I love sparring. You know, getting back, kind of backtrack a little bit about training. When I first came up, we were just beating the hell out of each other every class. And you did not learn well that way because you were afraid to try something because you get hurt. And when
yes.
I started teaching half. Like I think you mentioned earlier, you were doing the same half speed, half power. That way, people could practice something without getting hurt, develop new skills. You went through that same process too as a teacher, correct?
Yeah. Matter of fact, when I was teaching at the Granger Dojo, running the Granger Dojo, I participated with basics, kata, and I free sparred everybody in class each time.
Mm-hmm.
And then would increase their level. I would go as hard as they wanted to go. Then I'd push them just a little bit further to kind of bring them up. But, sometimes they call it, play fighting, but it's
Right.
actually very deliberate where you're being very serious. But what you're doing
Correct.
is doing the ultimate control. And what you're trying to do is work on timing.
Correct.
Being the most important, and a combination of techniques, and that can also be done if you really are paying attention to distance as well as timing.
Well, down here in those years, all the Japanese schools were just rough. I remember going to Koyama school, and they would allow me to train in their dojo. I was one of the very few people they would allow me to go in there and train. Everything was so hard all the time. But when I started teaching full time in the mid '80s, and I went half speed, and they called that, like you're saying, play spar. But that is how you learn. And I remember people coming back to me and saying, well, if you practice lightly, when you have to amp it up for reality, you're not going to be able to do it effectively. I always disagreed with that. What was your opinion on that?
Well, yes, I agree with your side on that argument, because what happens is you play, as I mentioned, you start ramping it. And
Right.
you start at half speed, and you start working on your timing, and then with an agreement, you start bringing it further and further up, because now you've got your timing, and that it starts to work. It is too hard on people. Even in boxing now, you'll see that they don't do hard
Right.
training with fighting and full speed and so forth to start with, because what happens is they get injured and can't go into the match. And so it's a matter of kind of working that up and so forth. But I think it's a very important thing, also, that there was a change of rules. They started
Mm.
in the karate program with what they call sundome, which means like to pull the punch within an inch or two, but with full
Right.
extension. Before, as you remember, if you were punching to the face, you had to pull it within an inch or half inch, but still have enough elbow potential to strike through
Hmm.
their face. And if they were coming in a mubobi or unprotected, oh, it was so dangerous back then because of how close the distance were. So what happens, I think, with the change of rule, that actually even helped in the tournaments with less injury and so forth. And you'll see quite a bit of difference if you go back to the 70 tournaments in both Japan and in England and so forth. Wow, there were a lot of people really getting hit. It was rough and tumble, as we remember, don't we, Ray? It was quite
It
quite.
was. One thing that I always hated when people come up to me and they would say, "Well, if you're stopping your punch, you're going to do that in a real fight." And unfortunately, or fortunately, I always said, "I've been in some real fights and I had no problem punching through the target." Even though we've been always been training stopping it. But
Yeah.
have you ever had people ask you that or tell you or give you that argument?
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that. And most of those people themselves had never been in a fight. We're making that assertion, right? If you had actually been
Exactly.
in a real fight, as things get pretty wild, there's no pulling.
No. Actually, you probably should pull more in a real fight because you get out of control. Well, before I wrap up the show, I wanted to ask you two questions. What is
Certainly.
your opinion of the today's state of the martial arts, the traditional martial arts? Is it better than it was? Is it worse? Where do you think we are?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Ray, because it's mixed. I think
Mm,
the organizations that we have now are much better with referee committees, organization, and all that. I think that's a very much a plus for traditional martial arts. I think the number of people participating is drastically lower than what it was. And there's other great martial arts that are drawing a lot of people away from the traditional. But what I love to see is the people who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who had taken traditional martial are coming
mhm.
back to the dojo because they
Yes.
love the motion. They love the chance to actually stay in better health.
Mm,
So, the biomechanics and the movement is so important to them and so forth. Plus the aspect of, self-defense even in our elder years. It becomes actually even more important because we look more like a victim than we did in our 20s, for sure. So
well, that's
I
what
yeah, the kids programs, oh my gosh, the how
yeah.
beautiful the kids are doing now, elementary school, junior high school, they are outstanding in kata and kumite. They're doing beautiful. We're losing a lot of the high school and even some of the college that used to
Yeah.
be because now they're off on other sports. Of course, rugby, soccer, you know, um, jujitsu classes, all of that. There is so much for people to do, but
Mm,
the elementary and also grade school. Um, Up to what we call middle school here, are doing
mhm.
incredibly well.
I wish I had studied martial arts as a kid with a philosophical teacher because I consider myself a philosophical teacher because it's the battle of martial arts is exactly this battle of life. Those ups and downs, the setbacks. And that's what I got out of martial arts. Even as a young adult, all of a sudden the setbacks that you have at your job or relationships, you could transfer it to martial arts. You got to work through it. You got to stay even. And so I believe the arts are better at this stage of life. Last question. Competition. It seems like there's some guys, I'm not gonna mention their names, that used to compete back in our day that hate tournaments. They think it's hurting the art. They give an example of, look what happened to judo when judo went into the Olympics. It just killed that art. It became a sport. What's your feelings about competition?
Yes, I think we need competition, and I think the competition that we have now, it may not be in the kobudo sense of the
Mm,
martial arts that we had before, but there is enough people still doing the old traditional martial arts to keep it alive. And there is a little bit of separation in Gembudo, in the modern martial arts for free sparring. I think without that sports competition, people wouldn't be press tested. They wouldn't be under pressure
right.
to really perform and really understand with what they do if it works, it does not work. So it can be debated both ways, but I love going to the tournaments and seeing some incredible athletes. It's much safer giving the rule changes than what it was,
Right,
and
right.
from that standpoint, I'm not quite sure if you look at the tournaments from the '70s, especially JKA and
Mhm.
others, that society would allow that much contact as a sport
Right.
as it was back then. And so it has been much more acceptable to society, given the competition we have. So from that standpoint, I like it because it keeps the pressure testing going.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is there are gonna be some martial artists that are sports. That's all they do, and they're not into the art, and that's fine. Like I was talking to Doug, what I found is the young people tend to go into competition, and when their competition years end, then they come back and want to get deeper into the actual art. So without that competition, I don't know how many people we would have lost. So yeah, I think
Well,
it's great.
I completely agree with that. We have a class at our dojo right now where we kid the youngest person in the dojo. We really tease him because he's 52. And we
A mere
range
child.
all the way from 77 down, but the majority of people are 70 in in the program and having a great time working on their kihon and kata and so forth.
I'm looking forward to coming up there and train once a month because I want to get with you old guys and work out, pick up some new techniques, try to remember some things I've probably forgotten now, and talk philosophy. So with that, Sensei, thank you so much. Like I mentioned with Doug and Marlon, what I'd love to do, I hope you'd be interested in, is getting, if we can get all 4 or 5 of us on a podcast and just talk about those early years, because like Doug says, memories bring up lost memories. Would you be interested in something like that?
Well, I'd love to do it, especially with the people you're talking about. I have great respect for them, and we do have some memories. You may have to do a lot of editing, however.
It's like Doug said, I can't bring up everything. So, well, with that,
No,
Sensei, thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next show then.
thank you very much, Ray. Take care.
Hey, thank you for joining the show. What a great conversation with Sensei Rick Hobusch. My next guest is Sensei Gary Tsutsui. Very well-known martial artist. He started training in the mid-60s. He was the first American to medal in the Wuko Championships, which is today WKF. He is definitely a kata expert. So please join my show with Sensei Gary Tsutsui, and I hope to have that out in a couple of weeks. Until then, take care.